welcome back to season 2 of Device and Conquer. I'm Michelle, and I'm here with Ty, my project manager and regulatory affairs manager for Lean. And today we are tackling one of the most talked about topics in US medtech regulation. And that's, how do you actually build a 510K like a boss?
That's right. We're going to build one like a boss. And it is the 510K. It is not to be confused with your 401K, the 410K. I have heard all of these numbers. It is the 510K pathway, and it's one of the most common pathways to market for devices in the US. And
Mhm.
while it might seem really straightforward, it's not as simple as people think. You see a 510K summary on the databases, and people think that's all that is, but that's just the summary document. You have to back
Mhm.
up all that stuff. So what goes into a 510K, Michelle?
Well, there is a lot of factors, especially performance testing, human factors, risk management, but they're kind of all underneath subtopics. So the actual titles of the different subsections of the 510K can be misleading if you don't know what to put where and where the FDA is going to expect. But I think the most important thing about what and how you put things in 510K is that a 510K is basically a story, hopefully a true one, about how you have it needs to be cohesive, it needs to have a theme, it needs to have a purpose and a focus. And you're telling the story of your device, including its development to commercialization plans.
And part of that story is, comparing it to what is to demonstrate substantial equivalence. And we're going to do a whole podcast after this one about how to pick a predicate device for your 510K, because it is the foundational cornerstone of your 510K argument. Argument sounds like an aggressive word, and maybe it should be persuasion. It's how you're telling the FDA, hey, this technology already exists. It's already safe and efficacious for the population. And what we're doing is we are bringing an improvement to that existing technology or a similar technology. Improvement gets a little tricky,
Eh,
so we
I
might
was,
that
yep, yep.
to an existing technology. And what you're trying to demonstrate, and your marketing team does not like it, is that you're just like someone else on the market.
Right.
That any changes to your technology don't raise new concerns of safety and efficacy.
And
Where do
this is
people
really
get in trouble, Michelle?
exactly. It's really tricky because you change if a change to indication pretty much says that, that's not going to be eligible for a 510K usually. A change to a specific type of technology. So the FDA has gotten really strict about what they consider um, things that raise a new question of safety and efficacy. So there's a flow chart that you need to be familiar with in the 510K guidance document that explains like the flow at every decision point through the review, and when FDA would give a NSE or non-substantial equivalent, or where would they continue to go down the flow chart looking at the evidence to determine the differences and if the differences themselves raise new questions of safety and efficacy. Now, interestingly, it doesn't matter if you can prove that whatever those questions are, that you've addressed them, just the fact that they were raised, the FDA has been pushing back on lately.
Yeah. And you mentioned the guidance document for 510Ks. I think it's important to note that there is one kind of master guidance document on 510Ks, but based off of your technology, there might be 510K guidance documents specific to what you're making. So,
Mhm.
like if you have software in your 510K or you are a software based product, there is an entirely different 510K guidance document. So,
And it doesn't contradict the main one. It's just adds to, and it gets real specific about what the FDA expects in all those sections that I was talking about
And
before.
honestly, a pro tip for newbies is to read as many of these product specific 510K guidances as you can. Because something that is really hard when you're trying to get in this industry is knowing all of the attachments you need to be providing in your 510K. Because, for example, nowhere in your 510K or in the 510K guidance does it say, put your risk management document here. But they're expecting to see it. And so you're left wondering, is this appropriate to
Yeah.
include or not include?
Where to put it, because the high level guidance document does not mention it.
Does
But
not
those, all
mention
those
it.
sub guidances are very specific about not to just to include it, but where to include it.
But where to? And a lot of those product specific ones get a lot more nitty gritty about what the inclusion is. So if you read a bunch of them, it will paint a better picture
Mhm.
of the types of documents that you submit to FDA in these submissions and what they're going to be expecting to see if you don't have the experience to do it yourself.
I
Also,
just I just raised that topic of the flow chart that FDA uses. You can't be misled by just reading the flow chart.
yeah.
You really need to read the sections and really understand the questions in that flow chart that the FDA is going to be moving through for their review. And so that context is really important so that you don't build your story wrong or in a way that the FDA doesn't recognize how you met those guidance documents and expectations. So because there's a lot of nuance in the actual words that they can't capture in the flowchart, basically.
And FDA is trying to make this clearer. In the last couple of years, they've kind of come into the modern world by allowing electronic submissions, and they have put out their eSTAR template, which does look and feel like something right out of a 90s computer system. It still feels painfully behind. But at least with the eSTAR template, you will know right away if you've at least will pass the electronic screening because you don't have to do e-submissions anymore, which had very specific parameters, and you would usually run it through a validation
Mhm.
tool.
Yep.
So luckily you get to skip all those steps and go right with the eSTAR.
The
But
eSTAR is, to your point about all those guidance documents that might be applicable, the eSTAR is really handy for that because it walks you through the specific content and like you have to check information about your product features. So for instance, like you mentioned software, you have to check that box and then it opens up a whole section of the 510K in the eSTAR for you to, and it tells you exactly what to attach. It even has tips and help so that they have excerpts from those guidance documents there, which brings up another thing that guidance documents, your engineering marketing teams argue that guidance documents are just recommendations,
we know they're not.
but they are embedded directly into the eSTAR template and the help, and they say FDA expects this.
And
So,
we were on exactly the same Wi-Fi because this is right where I was going with this. That help text, if you are starting a brand new project, download the eSTAR template. It's
yep,
totally free. Check what parts you think apply because it will tell you, I want to see on what page you address risk inputs. On what page do you
yep,
address these specific terms? And so when you are writing your technical language, you already have a cheat sheet to the terminology you need to be using. Make your life easier. Download the eSTAR, know how FDA calls it so you can call it exactly that terminology in your technical documents and your design history
hmm
file. And then
hmm
there's no question of what you meant because you're already speaking the
hmm
same language. See our podcast.
right. It also contains helpful tips. Like, for instance, if you look at some of the biocompatibility questions, they say specifically, oh, if you are a gas pathway, let's say, FDA expects that you have classified your device like this.
Yeah.
And so it is actually going a step further to kind of interpret, to help you interpret your product features correctly and match that to the testing that they expect. Because
Yeah.
if you classified it as, non-contact or whatever, because it's not actually touching the patient, but it's carrying, like, say, air to the patient, oxygen, then it's a gas pathway. It doesn't matter that the tubing doesn't touch skin or whatever.
These are all really good tips and tricks and are good ways to get started. Let's talk about the different types of 510(k)s because I think people really misunderstand how to use them and they
Mhm,
see these short turnaround 510(k)s and they're very alluring. So let's talk about the difference between traditional, special, and abbreviated 510(k)s, Michelle.
mhm. So traditional is the bulk of the types of submissions that the FDA gets, because usually for a new product, obviously you have to do a traditional 510(k), but for also major changes, you have to do a traditional 510(k). There's also a special 510(k), but that's very specific to only certain types of changes and a limited number. There's number does not published, but I guarantee you, if you submit more than 3 or 4 changes, FDA is going to say you've changed so much that we just think we need to see everything.
They consider
So
it
tell
a
them, like, what is for a special 510(k), kind of tell them what is that difference? What is redacted, or that you don't have to go into as much detail.
Yeah, so with a special 510(k), people really like it because one, it is usually quicker to process, but you also have to submit less information. The thing with special 510(k)s is that the types of changes they review are very specific. It's changes related to it basically there's a special 510(k) guidance that you should review
Hmm.
at. And it basically says, okay, what are you changing your own device first and foremost? If you're changing you have to be the manufacturer of this device. The next question is does your device change require performance testing? Do you need to basically tell FDA what you did to prove that your change doesn't impact your design in a negative way? If the answer to that is yes, then is your performance testing done with a routine, recognized, well-established test method? Like if it's a connector, does your connector test methodology
Like,
still appropriate?
for a
Is
recognized consensus standard that
a
applies.
recognized consensus standard. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you change a material, you can do biocompatibility. Say, hey, we have no impacts with the change of material. We've done biocompatibility. Maybe we've done some aging and shelf life. We don't see any negative impacts. Let's submit this material change as a special 510(k).
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But you have to submit your test reports.
but you have to
So
submit all
that's
of your test
mhm,
reports, and then
'cause
FDA has to agree that it's a special 510(k)
mhm,
change. What cannot be done is kind of those big changes that Michelle was mentioning before, like indication for use
mhm.
expansions, anything with like clinical usability data that is kind of semi-custom, chemistry, toxicology data that is too complicated.
Things out of, like, say you bracketed a worst case scenario and you've got, like, from A to C, but now you wanna do D or Z on the other side, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like
Like,
if you have this kind of clearance from 1 through 5 and you want to do a 0 and a 6,
mhm.
then that's
That's a
huge
new
difference.
that's outside of the, worst case that the FDA reviewed, and that will kick you into a traditional 510(k).
Yeah. So special 510(k)s for the most part are very few. It's a small percentage of the 510(k)s that go through every year. And then abbreviated, I feel like is even lower than
Yep,
that.
yep.
Um,
Let's
ab-
so quickly, let's talk about timelines. So traditionals are supposedly 90 days,
yep.
but in reality, they're about what, 120, 150 in that
Yeah.
range.
in that
And
range.
yeah, and then the other thing is that special 510Ks, and this is why people try to use them even when their changes exceed the scope. Special 510Ks have a 30-day review time.
Yep, that's why they're so appealing.
And this is also why FDA will throw them into the traditional pile if they feel like you've gone too far or just too many even, because they know that they're not going to be able to review 23 changes in 30 days, which
Right.
is a real thing that a client made me do once
We
upon a
have
time.
definitely had plenty of people try the special 510K route and then just think that they're going to be able to transition over to the traditional route, and it works. FDA will do that. Uh,
Mhm,
but the problem is that now you've kind of started your clock, and you have to submit all of the information that goes into a traditional 510K. So if you
mhm.
can't do that, you've basically
In
wasted,
180 days.
and you only have, you know, if they give you an AI, you have 180 days to respond to it. But is that enough to do the testing that you need to show your substantial equivalence? A lot of times that's not enough time, and that blows people's minds. But when you're talking about something like I need to do biocompatibility, I mean, they take 22 weeks because you are inoculating animals. Like, you have a duration that you cannot speed up nature.
Grow.
Yeah, things have to grow. You have to, in accelerated aging, you have only a set amount of parameters that you can play with, and then you just have to wait for the aging of your devices. There's no
Mhm,
pay to play there to get it faster. And I've argued with investors and CEOs and people who don't understand this. They think that they can just throw more money at the problem to get a result quicker. And that's not the case with medical device testing.
mhm,
In a lot of testing, there is a set amount of days, a set amount of time that has to be observed for your results to be validated. So you
mhm,
might be able to pay, oh, I want that report in 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks. But if you're already waiting 22 weeks, are you really going to buy yourself that much time?
mhm.
You know?
So I hope you guys have taken away that building a 510K is much more than just paperwork. It's strategy and storytelling. And
Yeah.
that strategy needs to be present from the cover letter all the way through down to the performance testing. And then you've got to take into account all those eSTAR, not only filling it out, but those helps, the tips to properly um, set the scene for the story of your device.
Yep, and remember that the 510K summaries are really just that. They are
Mhm,
a high level summary, and you should expect most 510Ks to be, several hundred pages with
mhm,
all of the attachments and performance testing that is done to demonstrate it. And it's all about, it starts with your substantial equivalence argument and the quality of your documentation. Documentation is so important, and it should be treated like if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, anyone could read your documentation and know what you did and
mhm.
know what you're building. So that's a little bit about the 510K process and, different types of 510Ks. I think in the next episode, we are going to discuss in greater detail predicate selection and substantial equivalence because it's so unique and it's so FDA. No one else
Mhm.
really does this.
Yep.
Um,
So we threw out a bunch of terms, some of which we went into detail and defined. But if there was a term we used that we didn't define, or you have your own set of terms or vernacular that you're trying to figure out what they mean, leave it in the comments for us. We'll post responses and discuss it in our next episode so that you understand all that vernacular in translating FDA to plain English. So stay compliant, and I'll see you next time on Device and Conquer.
bye now.